All right, thank you very much for joining us. This is Adam Asnes from Lingoport, and we're going to talk about launching an i18n initiative. i18n being short form for internationalization. It's a really long word, internationalization. And if you write it a lot, you realize why it's called i18n. It's I, 18 letters in the middle, N at the end. I didn't make it up, but it's the industry standard. Anyway, here with me, we have two very important Lingoport team members. We have Milen Epik. She runs global solutions. That involves a lot of internationalization and localization workflow type consulting. People know us for our tools very much, but we actually have a pretty thriving services business to help companies through various globalization initiatives from a technical aspect. Think of Lingoport and software kind of going together with globalization. That is our niche. We also have Olivier. Olivier won't be presenting. He's been on many webinars with me. He's our VP of Product Development. Olivier will be here for the Q&A, so make him work for it. Ask a lot of questions. All right. Milen is going to lead most of this presentation. I know Milen since like 1998 when I first got into the industry. I worked for a different company and everything. Milen is really one of those people who has seen a lot. She has, in the distant past, she ran like a whole master's series on internationalization, and she has worked as a globalization leader, running entire teams for, I think 20 plus years now. So she really has seen it all, and she's written it down for you in this presentation. It's really her. I'm going to start it off with a couple of things just to set the stage, and then Milen will take over the rest of this. All right, Milen, would you go to the next slide for me? All right, I saw this meme just the other day, and I was like, I have to steal this. All right, probably most of you on this call can completely relate to this, all right? But the thing that I want to emphasize here is that a lot of people who aren't exposed naturally in their daily lives to multiple languages really take English for granted. No duh, you know that. You know, maybe they went to Paris on vacation and boy, they got by with their English just fine, right? But that's not really the case. And I will say that, when we force our users to do something or to interpret, or maybe, they click through something and then the second screen down, they're suddenly in English. We're not taking care of our users. And I think that message has to get very clear around the organization. If you would go to the next slide, Milen. Mm-hmm. And, first of all, the role of we've really seen over the years, I mentioned how long Milen and I are in the business or in the field. We've really seen localization on the client side move from like a project manager to really a strategic position, a strategic point of view, because globalization is how you raise your revenue. It's one of the most effective ways to raise a company's revenue and spread a company's risk. Milen will have more information about that. But I also want to, kind of emphasize, and this is for you to take to your organizations, is that a lot of internationalization bugs, that is, you're showing the wrong date, you have an embedded string with the wrong language, you have broken concatenations, you have broken parameters, like the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog example, like where all of those parameters get put into a sentence, they're in the wrong order for a language. Those would not be accepted in the US English version, and that's really important to emphasize, that it isn't just a matter of ROI. For years, people broke down globalization into like this ROI equation. Nobody talks about the ROI on a spreadsheet of the color blue, yet rightfully, people will spend an awful lot of time looking at their user interfaces, their colors, their sizing, their positions. But language, that's like a fundamental building block of how your product is used. So it's time to pass that message up. And we hope that this webinar will really help you in that regard. Now, internationalization, I should preface for anybody new here, internationalization, it's writing, in this case we're talking about it, it's writing software so that it's capable of being localized. There's a lot to that. Milen will go into that in more detail, but you don't just throw language into it. There's a whole bunch of programmatic variables that have to be supported if you're going to support multiple language, and that's called internationalization. It's how the developers write their code, right? And what we've heard from a number of large global organizations is that localization, what gets called a localization bug, is very often, like over 50% of the time, actually an internationalization bug. So in that case, the localization team is not really in charge of their quality. They can't do it because it's not a matter of the wrong word. It's a matter of the wrong representation in the logic of the software. So that's a fundamental issue, and it needs to be addressed at the code level, at the code creation level. Remember this little cute chart on the bottom. The later you find what I'm going to call a bug, now, developers might call i18n an issue because it doesn't crash the software. They might fight over that, right? They can't see it. But the later that it happens in the development cycle, the more expensive it is to fix. And in fact, you know, I joke, you know, those i18n and localization bugs, they get cataloged, they get put in Jira, and they basically go to Jira to die. Because we come into companies and sometimes there are i18n bugs that are years old sitting in Jira, because what happens is the developer, it's not that they're bad, it's just that they're being pushed on the next feature, right? So for them to go back and perform i18n remediation, they have to open up the bug, they have to figure out what part of the code is that in, they have to wrap their head around what the code is doing, and then try to figure out and fix what that issue is. Some issues are really easy, some issues are not. So that's why those bugs sit around, and that's why that bug cost gets so much larger later on. So you have executives saying, well, what's the ROI of fixing that bug? And it's like, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how can you find that bug earlier? How can you make that an initiative so that everybody understands what that is? And then, yes, if you have bugs, how do you assign and fix them in a manner that won't pull your development team down? So with that, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to let Milen take over. I've already talked too long, hurting her time. I'm sure she'll forgive me. Anyway, take it from there.
Thank you for the intro. And yes, we do have quite a lot to cover. I will start with a business case. We will go through how to be successful with the internationalization launch and how to fit that within continuous globalization. But with that, let me just jump in. So this is about going global, obviously not a new topic to anyone at this point. But if you look at some statistics even a decade ago, this one is from US News, we can see that many names you will recognize here, mostly from the tech or material industry, were already making a large chunk of their revenues from international markets. Amazon is still a very interesting brand today. So I wanted to follow and see how they were doing since the last decade. And if you look at the right, you see that their international revenues continue to grow throughout the decade. So obviously, globalization, yes, does bring more revenue, and it's a way for companies to, be financially more successful. But it's not only that; it's also mitigating risks or spreading the risk. In fact, this is an article I found just from last month that summarized what's happening today in the world and said that globalization in the long run is going to be inevitable. And really, change is the only constant. So if we want to be successful, we need to have globalization as something that is part of our normal operations and, in our case, software development processes. Okay, so now we are all convinced that we're already globalizing. With that, it means we're localizing. And of course, if we're in software, we should be internationalizing. And we want to get to our markets real fast. But what if maybe the localized product is not that great? Shouldn't we go ahead, go into the markets and just start reaping the revenues? Well, obviously, I assume everyone here on the webinar knows that if you have quality issues, users may not like the product, so they may not buy it. Now you're basically shortening your revenues by those markets. But what's actually worse than that is the impression you leave on the users and how this can come and bite you even worse, because your brand might start suffering from it and it becomes a stain on your image. So that's pretty bad, but is there anything worse? Well, I'll start my first example with this particular internationalization example. It comes from a pharmacy label, instructions on how to take the medication. This particular one, this is a real world case example that has happened on a project I was checking. Luckily, I'll tell you what the end of the story was. But the English label read, take 1 tablet with food every 12 hours. So because of word ordering differences between languages, you can see locale 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one being French, prendre un comprimé toutes les 12 heures. That looked good. Locale 2, then there is locale 3 and 4. Something interesting about locale 3 and 4 is that the 12 and the 1 are switched, and that's because of the word ordering differences in German and in Japanese. The way you say that sentence would require you to put them in the reverse order. Okay, all that is fine, but here was one mistake, and in this particular mistake, which is in Turkish, the flipping didn't happen. So what it reads as is take 12 tablets every 1 hour. So obviously this is quite problematic. So who says that translation is just language and words? It can actually even kill people if it's done wrongly. And luckily there were the correct QA cycles, and it was caught somewhere in QA and fixed. So QA is also quite important, as is internationalization. All of our
Milen, I'm just going to interject that we actually have one globalized request customer. Mm-hmm. I will not name them or anything like that, but they really did have a patient die, and they died because of a disparity in a type of measurement between the US and Europe used in a radiation scalpel. And the reason, one of their trials was whether we could find that bug. when they were first evaluating our software. They have it a few years, but they really did. I mean, I know that that's not going to be the case for most anyone here, but also think about it like you have HR software. Let's say your company's in the HR business, and you have some fundamental error showing up on that person's vacation time or that person's pay or something like that. Holy moly, that's emotional. So some of these things may not be life and death, but they can get quite emotional in terms of allegiance to the product, complaints about the product later on. So I'll be quiet now. Go ahead, Milen.
Okay. I'll give you some other bad user experiences, and these ones might look less bad, but this particular one with character corruption definitely would create a bad image on your company. The top is a screenshot from a form where a user is trying to enter their address in German, and the characters are not displayable. They're unreadable and they come up as little squares. So that will definitely make your user just want to give up on using your product. The second screenshot on the bottom, this is just a display. It's not an entry. Again, there is characters that cannot be displayed in the presentation. This often also happens with Asian locales, with Korean, with Arabic, and certainly leaves a bad taste on your user's mouth. Another example is when English is mixed in with a local language, which happens when there are hard-coded strings left in the software, so they were not extracted and sent to translation. And now when you run your program, your technology under the German locale, you might have English text that creeps in. And this would happen in whatever other locales you choose. Having English left in the software or in the product, or having English hard-coded text left in the software itself, the code itself, is enough of a reason for the product launch to be stopped. So it is not acceptable in other locales. Here's another example. This is about locale-based formats. So there are, as you know, different formatting. Everybody knows, I assume, that here in the US we have first month and then the day with a format, but in Europe that is flipped. We first have the day and then the month. But numbers are actually quite interesting. Specifically, if you look at the screenshot on the left, the separators that you use as 1,000 separators or a decimal separator can be different. It can be a period in some countries or a comma in another. In some other countries, it could be something that looks like an apostrophe, like in the Swiss example, or a space in the French example. Or even the grouping may not always be in threes. India and Japan is some examples of that. The digits themselves would look different. If this would be like a percent where the percent sign fits, is it at the beginning or at the end? So just presenting and presentation formats vary, not only in numbers, dates, times, currency. There's other examples as well, address formats and names and so forth. Phone numbers is another, but also at entry. So in this example, the user said that their language is German, yet the date is not in German format. And speaking of dates, there is also the time zone topic that comes in. Is this date based on my date? If I purchase, say, a ticket, an airline ticket, is this when I purchased it on my time, or is it when it was done with the company out in Germany, for instance? So a lot of, so conversion is another area. And speaking of conversion, this is an interesting story. The Mars Climate Orbiter is a space probe that was launched in 1998. And at some point, like 9 months after that, NASA basically lost all communication with it. And later they figured out what happened. The manufacturer, which was Lockheed Martin, had assumed that the measurement system to be used was the US measurement system, the imperial system. But NASA uses the metric system. So all the trajectory calculations of when it was put in orbit or it was tried to be put in the right orbit failed. And when it disappeared, it either was burned in the atmosphere or it maybe got sucked into the sun's orbit. So a small localization issue, in this case an internationalization issue, might look small, but can be huge embarrassments and loss of money. And that's, you know, all of this is internationalization issues. It has to do with the code, and therefore the focus needs to be on development and engineering. These are not what could be solved with localization, as Adam was saying earlier. So let's have an engineering focus here and look a little deeper. If you happen to be new to doing internationalization, you might hear some of the, maybe some managers have some misconceptions and mention that, well, you know, we support Unicode and we're using, say, Java, and isn't Java internationalized, and therefore may expect that internationalization is not a big endeavor. But that is a misconception, because internationalization is a software development project, just like any other project that any software development takes on. And it also doesn't affect just the presentation, it goes through all layers of the software. So if we look at software components, here we have, it basically outlines 4 different layers. The presentation layer is where you will see like your formatting and how your text is being displayed. Much of the examples I had before were from screenshots and the presentation layer. But one layer below that is the business layer. So any business logic, for instance, if you do need to convert a date from maybe a system date to another date or a currency, that type of logic is in the business layer. And when you go to the persistence layer may have things such as where user preferences are stored, or how the time in UTC, in the universal time format, is stored. That happens at the persistence layer. And at the very bottom, you have your external systems, your databases, third-party applications. They need to also support internationalization, and they need to be able to store all that localized information right in there. So definitely it will go through all the depth of all the software you have. Therefore, it's quite a large endeavor. In fact, there are even more issues than what was represented in the prior slide. This is kind of like a laundry list, which I'm not going to go through, but certainly there are quite a lot of items to identify. So that means that testing is also very important, because as Adam was saying earlier, internationalization is making sure that your product is going to be ready for localization. So you should be doing all of the internationalization changes necessary, but you also need to make sure that when you're testing and you go into QA, in addition to your usual software development processes with, you know, doing unit tests and integration tests and system tests, you need to do all of those. But you also need to add one more testing, which we call pseudo-localization testing. The way we do it in Lingoport is, if you have this screen with a form on the right, we like to replace the characters with something that's readable but looks a little different, like this. So you can still see it, but we do apply some expansion to test it for languages that expand. Those are the dashes. We do put markers at the beginning and at the end of the segments to be able to identify if there will be a concatenation, and also font issues. So a short summary of that is right in here. So if there are no changes at all in the English, we would know that you actually have hard-coded strings left in there, and the developer can immediately go back and fix those before it is sent to localization. Concatenations is when you see two open and close brackets side by side. Font issues can be identified. Truncation is when you don't find the end of it. So pseudo localization testing is quite important and part of it. Now, you might not be a first-time internationalization person. You might have done this before. Either your team has done it if you're a manager. And Adam, I think this was one maybe you wanted to do, or would you like me to continue?
Have to hit the unmute button. You think after all you think I'd know that by now. All right. So yeah, I can certainly talk about this. First of all, whenever you have accumulated bugs, you have the idea of initiatives, and you don't necessarily know, like it's not always clear if you see something on the screen that it belongs in this part of the code. And so what I like to tell people and instruct people on is to, first of all, use Globalizer, and Globalizer will let you break down types of bugs and analyze large amounts of source code to get through to those exact issues. So it's never preferred to do it in an accumulated fashion, and we'll talk about a little bit later, we'll talk about finding these issues as you go, but life is life, and you know, there's going to be accumulated bugs, right? So what I like to tell people is don't go for everything. Go for issue type. So, you know, like the simplest one and the fastest things to fix are generally stuff like embedded strings. Those are really fast with Globalizer because there are ways to automate that procedure of externalizing, finding, and then externalizing. So maybe go for those first. You have to pick that issue and say, hey, I'm going to go for these embedded strings, and I'm going to exclude everything else. Because again, if you go for everything, suddenly it becomes kind of overwhelming. So you go for an issue type, like I'm going to go for embedded strings, I'm going to go for concatenations, maybe I'm going to go for all date time errors, you know, sort of down the line. And Globalizer really lets you segment them as you go for it. It's just more easy to kind of deal with a Globalizer scan that finds, say, you know, 80 issues versus a Globalizer scan of your entire, let's say you have 3 million lines of code and you suddenly find 3,000 issues. It's a little harder to deal with. So again, break it down by type, and you can also like get really, really fast with fixing them because all of the issues are of a similar nature, and you can kind of just sit there, you know, banging them out to fix them when you do it in that fashion. So making those last bullet, making it part of your agile process, I'm going to talk about that a little later. The idea is continuous is really where it's at. So as the code is being created, using Globalizer to find those issues and help the developer see them and correct them right away, as opposed to a later on process, which is much, much slower. So go ahead, Milen, take it to the next slide.
Okay. So what success looks like? What success looks like actually may depend very much on your perspective. If you are in a DevOps team, what's important and what would make you feel good that you are successful is that internationalization was done from the very beginning. You're not haunted by more bugs to fix. It was right, it's done one time. You can expect what kind of internationalization effort you need to put in and be able to scale and plan the project. And as Adam just mentioned, that this fits within your continuous development or your agile methodology. But if you are on the localization team, then your success is going to be that your deliveries are timely, your quality is good, but that also means that for you to be able to get there, you had enough time to get the localization done. And typically the localization is like the last mile, the part that is squeezed the most. So basically your success very much depends on the pain points that you've had. So this is a little bit similar to the prior slide. but development managers do have competing priorities. So it's hard to focus on what internationalization is, and they may not have enough staffing. They may not know what is really the problem, where is the problem, and how to fix it. And from localization managers' point of view, they feel stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they might hear that, say, the Japan office didn't like the product, it's not acceptable, the number of bugs keep increasing, but the development team doesn't have time or the ability to fix them fast enough. So our path to success is, first you need to make sure that this is a business priority. And the business priority should be communicated internally by C-level representatives. And when this is set as a business priority, it should also include, okay, we're going to global, but which markets are we going into global? Which languages? By when? And what is the high-level scope? Maybe which features or which part of your different products that you sell somewhere would be applicable to those markets. And after that communication is done with that kind of goals also understood, the internal teams will need to be supported, the development, the QA, and the localization teams. And of course, it will take budget. We recommend that in order to be able to identify how much effort and cost you will have to do an internationalization assessment, basically a gap analysis review that will look at all of the software. If this is existing software that you need to rectify, you need to look at all levels of it. So there's architectural review, UI, QA, databases, third-party tools. Then you need to, once you know the issues and you know how to fix them, you need to quantify them and then come up with an estimation of effort. And this should include also QA and technology to help support the development teams. And that budget goes towards getting the work done and enabling the DevOps team who will be doing the internationalization. So it seems like there's a lot here, and there is. But the point I want to make is there will be changes and process changes and new technologies and new knowledge that needs to be brought in. This does require careful change management so that everybody feels included. So taking part in the assessments and taking part in the decisions is important for the development leaders in the organization and the architects. So they need to be included and they need to be backed up. And even though it is a lot, it is cost for the company, there will be a return. And the return is both in terms of monetary ROI, but also on your brand, as we discussed earlier. So for the know-how, we do recommend that if you are new, you do have everybody get educated or get some training on i18n best practices. What we like to do at Lingoport is that when we work with another organization, we do provide custom guidelines. So we look at your particular technology, your product, how it's being architected, and what kind of coding practices are utilized by your development teams, and create guidelines that are specific to help you quickly rectify the issues. But then technology also is quite important. So the two technologies that I want to talk about, one is Globalizer, and that helps with the issue detection. It automates the internationalization issue detection via code scans. It can be brought into a into a developer's development environment, into their IDE. It can be put right with the PR processes, the pull requests. And there are also dashboards where one can keep track of them. And then Localizer is basically what helps you send it to localization, but it actually does more than that, and it also is used for pseudo localization testing. that we just talked about before. So you could be finding your issues, clicking on the particular bug. So in the screenshot on the left, there are issues at the bottom. And if you click on that issue, it will bring you directly into the line of code. So they're quickly and easily solved. And then when that is done, you can also do your pseudo localization testing to find the issues, hard-coded strings or other, and fix them. Now, how this would fit within, say, a larger scope of a localization project is that if you are coming from the localization area, you know that there would be translation management systems where all content is sent, whether this is files and folders that are manually uploaded into the translation management system to get your translations back. That would be one way, or it could be that there are connectors that automates pulling data from CMS systems, web CMS systems, maybe emailing systems or other systems. But when it comes to software, you actually need much more than that. So Globalizer will plug in directly into your code, as we described, to enable the engineers to quickly solve the issues. When strings are extracted and put in resource files, Localizer will be the technology that creates the connection to the translation management system, but it actually does more than that. It's not just a connector. It will also apply some QA tests or QA checks. For instance, it will check if in a resource file, if there are duplicate keys that were used, which is going to cause a problem. It also can do some format transforms when developers, they do get sometimes creative in the way they use JSON. So it's possible to take a JSON or an HTML and convert it from one form to another to make that connection easy. Another interesting and very important part of it is deltas. So if you have just changed a couple of strings in your resource file and you would send the entire resource file, the TMS system, the translation management system, would try to eliminate those by matching it against the TM. But there would still be cost involved. Maybe they turn into fuzzy matches, or there is also project management, or maybe minimum charges and so forth. If you send only the deltas, this will be more economic. And sequencing is an important part for continuous CI/CD or continuous localization, because if you send, say, a string, but there was a delay in returning that back, then there might be an update on it. Then you don't want that the delayed original version, the old version, overwrites the new one. So Localizer keeps track of that as well. So basically, when we're speaking about Globalizer and how we want to integrate internationalization into the continuous delivery into CI/CD, a very good place to integrate that is the developer's current area of interest, so where they're actually doing the code. And at the moment of doing the pull request, which is where code reviews would be done, you could automate Globalizer to function to basically test and scan all of the code and see if there are any issues right before the pull request is completed. And that way, no international bugs are going to be creeping in to your final repository. In fact, this idea was backed also by Google and Facebook. Facebook reported that their fix rate of their, I guess, bugs for their reports had gone up from 0 to 70% once it had been integrated into the code review step. So is important, and we have tools to help you with all of that. One of which we didn't talk about, and I know, Adam, you want to jump in here. We want to talk about also a little bit about Globalizer QA, I believe.
Yeah, I'll mention that, you know, the last part of it is that when people make linguistic adaptations, so like, okay, you've run the translation and you have a linguistic reviewer go over the application. Often that happens either out of the context of the application, you know, in like a source target environment, or if it's in the application, people are doing things like creating screenshots and circling, you know, the word that they want, making a note for it to get to changed, right? Well, that means that there's a whole process around that change that is very costly. And so localizer QA, you have to understand, Lingoport has some real advantages in that we're in the software repository. We are connected to where the code actually is, we connect to the TMS, but you have to understand the TMS is not where the code lives. So it has no relationship to the source code directly, whereas we do. So that allows us to have a patented solution here for localizer QA. So it's really super simple, and you can see videos of it on our website. You look at the screen, you don't like a word, you click on it, you suggest what you want the change to be. There's a reviewer acceptant workflow, but once that's accepted, it's literally a check mark, and the repository for the software is updated. So there's no searching, you know, for some localization engineer to search through the resource bundles and find where this word exists. Maybe that word exists in 12 different places, right? Because that happens all the time. So it's very specific. Each case is very specifically tracked, and so the updates are really, really fast. This also allows you to, you know, consider, if you have a well-trained machine translation system, you can consider the workflow of always being localized. So have localizer push out to a machine translation system, not just the TMS, get those machine translations right away. So development is literally never waiting for localization, literally happens in seconds. And then have a human component just see the feature that somebody's working on. We have a few customers doing that. By and large, people still go the human translation route. But I honestly think that within a few years, that's going to change. And we'll have this QA emphasis. If you're going to have humans look over things, why not do that in context? The most powerful place to do it is in the context of the application. So do it there in localizer QA. That's enough. We got to get to the Q&A. Next question, or next slide. All right, very good. We're at the Q&A. First of all, I'm going to urge you, like, if you have deeper questions or you just kind of want to talk about your situation, just reach out. We've got a few emails here. By the way, my email, if you ever want to talk to me, is simply adam@lingoport.com. We'll get you there. It's not my official address, but that'll get you to me. It's a nice alias. Good to be the boss and have those things. Anyway, we have so many questions, and they're awesome. So I'm going to start with the very first one. How, you know, not everybody here actually attending, as you well know, is a native English speaker. So I'm going to read it, grammatical errors and no judgment. How an i18n bug may be costly in later stage, if you can explain with example. Thank you. Okay. Great question. So he's taking that first slide I had with the graphic of the bugs getting bigger, and he's questioning it. Why is it more expensive? It's a great question. All right, it's more expensive because when you think about it, I wrote a little note for myself here. What goes into finding and fixing an i18n bug the usual way versus this other way we're saying? The usual way is it's found during some effort of testing. in the organization. That may happen before, but typically even after localization. So you sort of strung things out. Now remember, the development team is probably using some flavor of Agile. So they're doing their effort, their sprint. The localization happens, some testing happens. The developers have moved on to something else. That's just reality. Developers have this cadence of constantly having to do something. And the fact that something goes out for translation and comes back means that there's a time delay, because probably in most organizations, that translation loop has happened late in the cycle. Sometimes that only happens 1, 2, or 3 or 4 times a year, rather than on a weekly, immediate, or bi-weekly basis. So it could be significantly after. That means when a bug is reported, it's logged. Let's say you have a screenshot of it, you log this bug. You have a project manager who has to look at it, assign it. A tester has to have found it in the first place. That's time. A screenshot is done. Then the developer gets it, and they have to say, where is the bug? Just because it's on a particular screen doesn't mean that that screen maps nicely to where in the source code that is. It's not all that well done. A lot of times there's microservices if you're using that type of architecture, but even then you don't know which repo that's in. It's just not obvious a lot of times. So you got to track it down. Once you find it, is this the right one? You've got to figure out, what do I refactor? Did I introduce another bug by refactoring that? Maybe not. Maybe it's just string externalization or a concatenation I have to refactor. That's fine. But in a lot of cases, it's a little bit more tricky to find. So let's say I've used a calendar class in whatever programming languages you've used. I forgot to pass it locale, right? So it looks normal. It looks like good code. I've got a calendar class in there, but that calendar class is going to default to whatever the machine's default is. So it might be hard to actually even find the bug, right? But we all know, hey, just because my machine default might be, French, I might be on a machine in the United States that defaults to US English, and now I'm getting the wrong behavior, right? So you have these complicated what-if scenarios that might feel like corner cases, but they're very realistic. People travel, right? So that's one example that might not be obvious to find. Once it's found, it's fixed, it has to be verified, and then somebody has to mark it off as approved. That is a long tail process. That is expensive. Multiple people are involved, multiple testers, and time is money also. Developers are one of the more expensive resources within an organization. So now you've wrapped up time around this fix, and that's expensive. Now, compare that to the way that developers like to work. So I was on this very prescient Twitter thread last night. I didn't comment, but I read it. It was like hundreds of comments. And the question was, what helps you speed up as a developer? And there was a lot of notation to develop to environments and workplace stuff, and not having to go to meetings. But one of the things that came up is automate everything that's repetitive, that I don't have to personally drop everything and deal with, right? So one of those principles is that continuous automation is that work is checked while I develop code or during the pull request. That's a really important gate for people. Like, if you're a developer, you're like rolling your eyes, of course, and you're on this call, I'm sorry. But if you're not used to development, that is how they work. So they're running things like check style, find bugs, whatever it may be for whatever programming their language. They're already used to looking at coding quality, security issues during the point of code creation, like right from their IDE. That IDE is interactive development environment. That's where developers work. Or during a pull request, that's when they're typically running a code review. So developers will sit down, either review their own code, but usually review other people's code, it's like checking your work. It's like when you write a document and you share it with other people to check your work and for them to edit it. It's the same thing, right? So if you point out, hey, you create an internationalization error here, it's really fast no testers are involved or anything. There's no logging a bug because you caught it right away. Think of it this way. You use grammar checkers when you write a document if you're non-technical. Yeah, you do, right? And you fix it right away. It's really quick. Same sort of thing. All right, I talked way too long on that. All right. Apparently, the pharmacy example you used was missing with food. Just a note that came in. Hello, this farm, I like this question. Milen, you're the right person for this. So far, Olivier is getting off easy. Hello, this pharmacy example is super interesting. I am wondering what should be the best solution here. For me, it is clear that the fault is from the translators, as the variables could have moved into the cat tool. No, I'm just going to say, when you talk about continuous globalization, you talk about a lot of small little projects that need to be executed quickly. You're trying to make less work for the translator, but go ahead, Milen.
Yeah. Well, actually, the problem in that particular case could have been avoided because when you do concatenation, especially when you put words in the middle of a sentence, you have other problems with grammar and conjugations and so forth. But putting numbers only has a plural issue that could be solved. The particular problem in that example is that for some of the languages it actually worked well, but not in another. The reason it didn't work well in one of those languages is that in the code, the variables were, it just said variable 1 and variable 2. So a better practice is actually to say what that variable is. So it could be number of hour could be in the in the curly brackets as the variable, and number of tablets. So that way you do provide some more context to the translator as to what is what.
Okay, very good. I'm going to jump to the next question here. How do you achieve the i18n readiness for RTL languages? RTL being right to left, so think Hebrew, Arabic. Very quickly, pseudo-localization will really help you there for sure. But what you're talking about are tags that'll be in the presentation layer that will mirror the application. And so you have to make sure those tags are there. That is a little bit more complex to detect. So in that case, it's hard to look for something that's in something that's wrong versus hard finding something that's missing, that's just not there. So it involves a little bit more manual work to make sure you have a rendering of the screen. I'm not big on pseudo-localization being the only way that you test something. I like the static analysis thing because pseudo-localization, it's important, but it comes later, right? Naturally. It's good if you get the developer to look at the pseudo-localization during their unit tests, that's really good. That's an efficient thing to do, but people don't always do the right thing, right? So with RTL, you've got to have a very careful pseudo-localization loop. Anything to add there, Milen?
Yeah, I mean, you do everything that you do for internationalization, let's say for your European and other locales. But then the screens need to be flipped. So part of that may have to be manual depending on how it's developed. So there's quite some UI design aspects to it. In terms of the text that you put inside these screens, or if you have like HTML snippets, you would be using some markup that says this is RTL or BiDi. And then within the text, there has to be also markings of when the directionality changes, because it's right to left, which is the opposite direction. But if you put, say in your Arabic sentence, you put some English words, lingo port technologies, for instance. Now the directionality needs to switch to be left to right. And therefore you need to put some more markings to switch and indicate, oh, from here to here, the directionality is the opposite, and then switch it again. So there is all these markings for the text. But the additional part I wanted to add here is you really need to think of how the application works, because the logic is a little opposite as well. For instance, if you have a right arrow on the screen, typically we in the US will think that a right arrow means next screen, but a right arrow now means go back. So there is, you need to really think about, how the whole application functions as a user of that locale. Yeah, and also, I mean, if this would be, if when you have menu items on the left, that's the screen design, it needs to be the other way around. The wrapping, if you have columns, and then there's maybe these are all your different functions. Typically, you see them at the end of a web page. Also, the last one on the right for us might be short because that's the end of the list, but now it's the other way around. So all that is on layout. And also, of course, when forms are being filled out, the characters will need to be rendered the opposite direction. Which,
all right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you have anything? I'm cutting you short.
No, that wasn't.
Okay. I'm just going to mention that we are on the hour. If you have to go, I won't be offended. We do have more questions. I'd like to kind of get through them here. The next one really involves mobile applications. Can you do pseudo localization for mobile applications since the screens are small? Adding prefix and suffix characters may tear the screen more obviously to test on the small screen. Please suggest. All of the pseudo localization that we do is very controllable. We have suggestions for how things expand. That can be altered, but I still would say, like, literally everything we do, we assume there are multiple interfaces involved. It's gotten super common that like every application or a lot of applications have a mobile app component, sometimes two, one for Android, one for iOS, a web component, sometimes a desktop, native desktop component as well. So there's a lot there. And differences from the norm are the norm. So there's a lot of controls there. I was going to give that one to Olivier, but I'm just trying to go fast. Who is responsible for i18n and pseudo testing? Is it the dev team or localization team? I'm going to say both. Mostly with the i18n static analysis, which is a term for what Globalizer does, that should really be pushed up to the dev team. Sometimes you get QA using it as a gate and insisting upon it in cooperation with localization. It's actually a place to really get localization and development working together, because it's like a very clear quality measurement. And it's a way to, kind of like people talk about bridging that gap, shifting left, sometimes people talk about as if like, left is the beginning, so at the code creation, right? And pseudo localization testing, I really think it should be like the way that Localizer does it. It literally is happening all the time. So if somebody, kind of submits their code, runs a build, it's already pseudo localized. Nobody has to remember to do anything. Nobody has to push a button or anything. It just happens, boom, 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 like that. So it's a natural part to include in the unit testing. And it's also a way for localization to talk to development, as in, hey, English, I'm going to pick on US English since so much code is created there. US English is just another locale, right? So when you use pseudo-localization testing, your developers can see it. They can understand it. That's the point of it. They don't have to speak the target language to see it. So, all right, I hope that was enough. If I do not have a plan to localize any software for a native market, can I still go and choose the i18n implementation? Will this cost me extra budget? All right, it will cost you extra budget. If globalization is your plan, I would always suggest that you do it as early as possible. I mean, if you're in like minimum viable product proof and you expect your whole UI to get thrown out later on, you know, that's a special case. But if you've sort of gotten beyond that, and most of everybody is beyond that if you're in this kind of a webinar or considering these kinds of things, I definitely feel like you should be including internationalization and localization in your plan, and you should build for it now. It does cost more because it doesn't cost that much more.
But it costs less if it is developed from the very beginning, if you're starting.
Right.
It will cost less if you already build it from the get-go with internationalization rather than have to retrofit it later.
And how much less? A lot less. I mean, we're talking internationalizing a lot of application is a multi-seven-figure issue. Once the application is super mature and super large, I'm talking about like, you know, you got 3 million lines of code and you have to rip apart your whole presentation and your business logic to put something like internationalization in. It's going to be expensive. If you know, maybe if you wrote a phone app and it's fairly small, we'll say 50,000 lines or less. It's still expensive, but it's not on the order of this giant thing. So, you know, some of that is it depends, but I would always suggest doing it early because things get larger. How to deal with colors and i18n readiness. I'm just going to say Globalizer will catch when you've assigned a color block for examination. That probably falls into the localization department more. What is the systematic way of evaluating if i18n solutions we put in place is right or thorough? Well, I think that you've got to pilot things. You've got to test things before you're going to get rollout and acceptance. And so one example is rather than take on your whole application, take on a portion. And let's say you're going to look at that and you're going to, let's say you were going to use Globalizer, run Globalizer on that portion, have a pilot kind of thing. We always supply source code, but everybody always wants to see it on their own stuff. So that's one way to do it. Let's say you're not using Globalizer, really like develop some plan, test it, have some demonstratable benefit that you can bring back to the development and the rest of your organization. Highlight that, really like scream it from the rooftops. That's what I would say. All right. Oh my God. Can your tools help us do mirror testing for right to left languages? Not really. Pseudo-localization will help you, but there's a lot more to what we do than pseudo-localization. I would say, again, the issue is Globalizer is not going to detect what's not in the code. That's a difficult piece of logic, but there's so much more to it that will happen that I would say it's still very important. Olivier, you got off super easy. I took all the questions. All right, we got some thank yous, a few of them. All right, you'll all get email from me with recording access and the like. Milen, anything else to add?
No, thank you all for attending.
Really thorough presentation. Thank you, Milen. You made this one really easy for me. Thank you, everyone, and we'll come up with the next webinar. Be on the lookout. You'll get email when that's happening. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for so many good questions. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.